Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Monday and welcome to Norse Studies. Today we are going to finish up the section we began last week in the Heathen Handbook by Woden's Folk Kindred, and we will begin with what they have to say about rune rituals. In the context of divination, the authors, after they were done moaning about modern practices that have developed around the runes, they are definitely not fans. They essentially describe the outline of what Tacitus described. First was to cut a bough from a fruit-bearing tree to divide it into small pieces and then mark them. The fruit-bearing tree, this could also refer to trees that happen to bear nuts as well as, conventional fruits. Then the tiles are scattered over a cloth. The author specified a white cloth and said the cloth must be set aside strictly for divination and should preferably be made of natural fibers. The person should focus on the question to be answered and to realize that with this particular rune divination that it's unlikely to be just a simple yes-no interpretation. The author suggested thinking in terms of why or how when they're making rune inquiries. Then a prayer is offered to the gods. Then the person reaches down and chooses 3 rune stones. Commonly people choose runes that stand out to them or that as they kind of hold their hand over them, they just feel right. Then the runes are interpreted, and one method is to relate each rune to one of the Norns. The first would be Urd, relating to how the past is affecting the present. The second is for Verandi, which is the weird as manifested in the moment. And the third for Skald, the future as shaped by the past and present. And then there you go. Now, for me, I think it would be a little unreasonable for every time you wanted to do a rune reading to go out and get a branch and cut it up and do all these things and go through this whole form. I think it is possible to read the runes in a much more informal way as well as a more ritualized way, but we will get into that once I start the series Journey Through the Runes beginning in February of next year. Then they talked about Galder using the runes for as songs or chants, and Gander, which is carving runes onto sticks for magical purposes. Now, obviously, when it comes to singing the runes, today we don't know how they were sang or what the compositions were like or anything like that. The authors say that chanting the runes is a bit more usual these days. However, I have seen many videos of the Fellowship of Northern Traditions holding ritual, and they have begun singing runes as part of the proceedings. And so there is a modern resurgence of the custom, and it is developing and evolving in real time. Gander rituals vary. Sometimes they are incorporated into a bloat, or they are used to craft good fortune or to ask the gods for aids. Then the authors went on to the subject of oaths, talk about how this was a very common practice in the lore, as well as ancient heathenry and modern heathenry. Oaths are sworn over legal matters, or sumbrel, or to declare allegiances. It is a very serious matter to take an oath. I mean, it is a binding thing, and it's worth remembering that oath breakers are one of the few who are specifically mentioned to be unlucky enough to be condemned to Niflhel in the afterlife. Oaths can be as a matter of profession, as a declaration of loyalty to one's ancestral gods. The ritual involved in a profession may vary in its form, but the idea at its core is to formalize the spiritual relationship between oneself and the gods, the ancestors, and the living folk. Oaths can be made at blot and sumbrel, and again, these of course are binding oaths. Whatever is promised, it might be easy or difficult to live up to, and because the oaths are given publicly, it's understood that the community is aware of what we have sworn, and they will expect that we follow through, and they will notice if we don't. So, something to bear in mind. They had a little bit more to say about oaths and community, essentially that the practice of taking oaths amongst ourselves for the purpose of establishing and strengthening communities is essentially creating sworn brotherhoods with all the responsibilities that entails. The authors then conclude their thoughts about oaths by explaining that the warnings that they give to be sure that you are going to follow through with your word and there are consequences if you fail to do so. They're not saying this for the purpose of discouraging people from taking oaths, because oath taking is a part of heathen tradition and culture, but it is also a responsibility. So people should be careful with what oaths they swear so that they make sure they're not promising more than they can deliver, and so that they can be seen as the kind of person who will undertake a responsibility, fulfill that responsibility, and therefore can be the kind of person that others can rely upon. And this is also an acceptance that it may be necessary to make sacrifices or to forego our own conveniences or preferences in the moment in order to live up to our promises, and that this is a virtuous thing for us to do. Then they talked about spa and seether in the lore. These are both forms of magic. They don't fit neatly into categories. Spa means prophecy, and it's likely related to the word spiha, which means to spy. Spa is composed of two main talents. First, the sight, which is the ability to see things that are invisible to most people, and also the ability to foretell the future. Spa is passive. It deals with what can be seen or foretold, but it isn't used to shape events. However, seether is more active, and it's tied to the weird. It's essentially changing the flow of the weird to alter the outcome. According to the authors, our ancestors did have some trepidation about seether, going so far as to call it ergi, meaning shameful. And the authors believe that this came from the perception that seether essentially wasn't fair play. It might have even been thought of as kind of a form of cheating. But interestingly, it didn't follow that those who practiced seether were hated or persecuted by their communities. Some were very welcomed. They would take an important part of festivals and their skills were honored. So the main thrust is that seether is a tool, much like a sword, and it can be used for good or ill. And the manner in which it is used says more about the practitioner than the tool itself. And that's very consistent with modern views of witchcraft and the use of magic. You know, the magic itself is this neutral force. The purpose to which it is directed, that is a reflection upon the practitioner, not the magic. So, speaking of magic, only looking at it how it was amongst our ancestors, the authors began with explaining that both spa and seether require an individual to have an innate gift for magic, something that is inborn within them, much like other talents or aptitudes, but also that the gift of magic was not universal amongst most people. And that seems pretty reasonable. There's a lot of different human talents. So some people have a great talent for art or music or the sciences or mathematics or, very hands-on types of products. We're all individuals. We don't have the same amount of capability within us. So it does make sense that magic also would not be exactly the same amongst us either. And so because of it was not, universal and widespread, there were only going to be a few people within their society who could actually work spa or seether. Now, what little we do know of rituals often involved elements of both spa and seether. The difference between the two disciplines is, of course, defined by seether being an active magic that's altering the flow of the weird, whereas spa is sight, it's passive, and it merely observes. This difference is akin to our modern ideas of projective and receptive energies. Projective is active, it goes forth, it does things. Receptive is passive, it absorbs, it envelops. Now, magic in the modern age, one of the problems faced today is that the descendants of people who possess the gift are few and far between because, of course, during the conversion, especially when it got to the nasty bits of the conversion, many people who had that particular gift, if they were not careful to hide it, ended up being put to death. The second issue, of course, lies in the proper instruction. Because of the conversion, again, a lot of knowledge and experience was lost. And so today we're essentially having to start over from scratch. And this is difficult. But as per usual, our task is not to wallow in what we were given, but just to pick up the pieces and manage as best we can, and to make sure that we're leaving a decent legacy for the next generation to build upon. We are one chain in a line of a very, very long chain, and right now we are the generation who's establishing some things. And honestly, while it's not very convenient for us, it is still a privilege. So maybe we could do less whining and more researching and more practicing so that we have knowledge to pass on. And that finished up the section on ritual. The authors agree that the key ingredient to successful ritual is sincerity, and it's also important to remember that ritual is neither the beginning nor the end of heathen faith. Our character, how we conduct our everyday lives, and the connections we form with the gods, ancestors, land spirits, fellow worshippers, friends, family, that is the beating heart. It's also good to remember that rituals are a part of our heritage and a way to practice that heritage. It's the carrying of the torch and teaching others how to do the same in their turn. So ritual is also fundamental to community. It takes more than just common purpose and beliefs to bring people together. It's the things that they do together that create the ties that bind. So, something to think about, especially as many of us in this world that's falling apart are trying to pull some pieces together and still have some community that's actually a community once all the dust settles from all of the rigmarole of the outside world. So that does it for this week. Next week, we are going to be finishing up the book. The week after that, we're going to be taking a little bit of a break. I'm just going to be focusing on what I learned about Northern Yule traditions. And then in the new year, we will begin with the book that almost successfully drove me away from all forms of heathenry. So you don't want to miss that or my rather theatrical gripes that I will have about the author and his manner of writing. So, I guess that is it. Comments, questions, concerns, ideas, impressions, thoughts, all that good stuff. Please let me know in the comment section below or come see me on Gilded. There's a link to join us in the description box below, and you'd be very welcome. And guess I will see you in the next one. Bye.